requested anyone having in the county wetland donations that they would consider giving to the Water Authority as part of their overall program. And thus this parcel was received from PAR 3, and we have the paperwork regarding that, but also part of the Goose Prairie acquisition area that had been part of our program up until mentioned in 98, 97, 98, and now receiving this. Wanted to find out from the board if there were any concerns. We did write a letter because of the timing of planning and zoning and the Board of County Commissioners. I requested of Mike if we could send out a letter to delay so that staff could come to the board and that an opportunity from the consultant representing the owners could come and answer any questions the board might have, any concerns. And so we do have representatives from Kleinfelder here that will do a short presentation and then be open to any questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Dwayne Booth, Lutheran Strong Hyatt. I drew the short straw so I get to go first. The Kleinfelder is the lead consultant. I'm the engineer on the project, and we did receive. Where's my scissors?
Ron, can you help them?
No, I was looking for the Zoom.
You zoomed out.
Oh, there it is. It says Zoom limit. I was not able to meet last week, but Cheryl and Bill did meet with some of your staff to go through the letters and concerns. The county commission meeting has been postponed, so we can go through some of those concerns and with citizens and get more education out there of what the mining process is. And actually, it's more of a harvesting process versus a mine. It's not like a sand mine or a lime rock quarry. The project is a little over 1,000 acres as far as the entire lease area, so it's a large piece of land. The project limits, including the setbacks, is about 580 acres, a little over that. The peat harvesting area is right at 300 acres, and then the cells of what the harvesting area will be at any one time varies in size. I know it's kind of hard to see, but varies in size from 11 acres from a small area here to a larger phase 1 area of about 50 acres here. So we're looking at anywhere from 1% to 5% of the land being harvested at one time. The process of peat harvesting, the peat is just basically organic, woody material from decaying vegetation. The whole premise of this is a restoration project based on the 1940s information we have in the 1940s area. There was a lot of open water body here. As we have short rainfalls, you get a lot of vegetative growth, it decays, rots, fills in. So this thing has been filling in since the 1940s. Basically what we're looking at is removing some of that peat material, certainly not all of the peat material. We're not even proposing to go down to the sand layer substrate that's there. So it's not a grading and reworking of the earth, it's just taking out that organic peat material. It is in a wet condition, and I know there have been voice concerns with odors and dust and things like that. Basically, we dewater it enough to be able to handle the material without it being soaking wet. It dries to about 50% moisture content, gets loaded on the trucks. All the material will be going to Oklahoma to their processing facility. So there is no processing being that it's wet material, there is no dust, there is no airborne particulates coming off this material. And compared to sand trucks and lime rock trucks and Durastress, the trucks, you probably don't care about the roads, but the county commission does. These trucks are much lighter because it's an organic material. So the weight of the trucks, the weight of the load is about half of what a sand truck would be. Mentioned processing offsite. I think that was most of my, as far as the overall global, how cells are developed. The first cell is the most difficult, but from a stormwater standpoint and dewatering standpoint, dewatering is just within the cell. It's a localized area where the water is drawn down just to the level of what we need to extract the peat. So it's not a complete drying up, but it's just dewatering, lowering that table in that area. So if we only need to go 4 foot deep, it's dewatering to 4 foot. If it's a cell where it's a little bit deeper feet to 15 feet, it's dewatering to that level. So it's not a global drawdown of water table. The water's not leaving the site. It's a totally closed basin. With the berms that will be constructed, the surrounding areas that are not to be mined or harvested will be rehydrated as we go, so there's no influence on the surrounding areas. And part of the phasing of this as well is there's still, even the areas that are to be processed will be hydrated. So and as we finish a cell, it'll go immediately into reclamation as they move into the next cell for excavation. So the exposed land area is minimized, to a small area at a time. Reclamation is happening right behind the harvesting, and then as before the next one goes, the reclamation will be complete on one. It'll be starting on the next one, and then going into the third cell type thing. So it is being restored as the project moves. The project generally will start in this area and move to the north, away from most of the residences over to the east and to the south. And then it will move down into these smaller cells right in here. The large areas here and the area in here, I believe the water authority property lies within this corner here. We're required to maintain 200-foot setbacks as a very minimum. From 44, we have over 700 feet at the minimum. We have closer to 2,400 feet here from the Durastress side of the County Road 44. That's all hardwood forested, and you can see islands that are left out there. Those were historic islands. There's trees that are part of the historic landscape that was there in the 40s, and we're leaving that as the same as well. So the goal is to restore back to marsh areas, open water bodies that resemble what the land looked like in the 1940s. Stormwater-wise, at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, somebody was concerned with flooding. Quite the opposite is, as you remove we have a higher potential of flooding now that all this decayed material is there to build up the volume of Goose Prairie. As we remove this material, we're actually restoring historic flood levels and lowering it back down. Again, there's no discharge of water. All of our, if we are successful moving through the county process, there are multiple state and federal agencies that we have to go to, multiple monitoring requirements that this will be subject to. And so that's pretty much what I have to present. Bill is here to discuss more of the environmental side of it, and we'll be here to answer any questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. To be real brief and kind of go over kind of site conditions and what's being proposed. approximately 330 acres. It currently consists predominantly wet prairies. There's 207 acres of wet prairies. The rest is wetland hardwood forest, which consists of 60 acres. As Dwayne indicated, it's a restoration project in terms of we looked at the historical images and went back to the 40s and 50s and digitized water areas. As you can see here, historically there was approximately 214 acres out of the 330 acres consisted of open water. Following mining, the area is going to be claimed as a broad range of habitats. Currently, as I said, it's mostly wet prairie and a little bit of hardwood forest. The final reclaimed site will consist of 45 acres of wet prairie. That will be intermediate deep marsh, 48 acres of intermediate marsh, 38 acres of deep marsh. We'll have shallow and deep wetland forests, 12 and 14 acres of each. There'll also be open water, which is blue, shown on the map. There'll be forested islands to create appropriate habitats. And ultimately, it will serve a greater biodiversity and provide a much wider array of habitats out there. And that's it for the presentation. Thank you very much. Actually, I do have a couple. I'm sorry. I do have a couple of pictures of reclaimed sites, just to throw in there, which do show kind of some similar habitats that are being proposed on a smaller scale. The first one has shallow marsh, intermediate marsh, and deep marsh habitat, also has open water in the distance. Then this particular one has forested wetlands on the edge of the water body, some intermediate marsh, deep marsh, and open water habitat as well. Thank you very much.
If I may, please just add one more thing to show that the front color. The photos that you just saw are actual photos of reclaimed areas that have been harvested by the state applicant. So we've got a long-standing history of agricultural operations in the county, and likewise a very successful history of reclaiming these wetland systems that we harvested from.
Who is the owner and the applicant?
The applicant is Steve Cook, CNC Peat.
Say that again,
Steve Cook with CNC Peat.
But he does not own this land.
No, ma'am, it's leased. It's actually their multiple landowners associated with the property.
I'd like to ask the pleasure of the board. I have several public input request cards for this topic. Do you want to hear public input before we discuss?
Yeah, can I ask another question?
Sure.
Okay. When I look at the maps you put forward, and I have read, although I can't remember the staff report very well, this red line on shows the approximate mine boundary, and you are asking for a mine permit for the area which is delineated with the red lines on some of the, they're asking for the applicant is, and that's around 1,100 acres, but you're only going to mine 300 and something.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
So why are you asking, why is it including such a huge area? Including areas to what is the east, which are upland areas off of 450.
Right, there's a couple of reasons. One is because it is a lease, and it is the request of the landowners. It also has to do with the county process when you're doing a conditional use permit that authorizes a shorter term use of property that to encumber, to include the entirety of that ownership within that.
Well, right, but a conditional use permit for mining is usually a 20 or 30-year permit.
Correct.
And I assume this one will be at least 20 years,
That's correct.
but it's for the whole
Well, and if I may, they're only mining, and you made a good point, where the material is, in concert with the restoration plan to meet the 1940s, pre-existing land use. If we were to deviate outside of this plan, we would have to come back before the county to modify the permit. We would have to go back through the public hearing process, and we would have to modify all of our other associated permits with the state, the federal government, related to changes to the permits and the plans. So we couldn't just arbitrarily decide to do more. There's no reason to, because the material doesn't extend that far.
Is the proposal for reclamation to go back to the 1940s or approximate their conditions, is that required, or did you all just decide that is something you thought you should? I mean, I'm trying to figure out why that's how you're going to reclaim it. Is that a requirement?
No, ma'am, it's not a requirement. The applicant could have elected to harvest every square foot of material out of the wetland system and leave it in a very different situation. But because he is, and he has a long-standing history of land stewardship in the Central Florida area, he felt that it was the appropriate thing to do to get this back to a more natural condition.
Thank you. Any other questions?
No. Madam Chair, before you bring up the public, just to remind the board that the only reason you're even hearing about this is because we have an adjacent piece of property. And so I think our concern was making sure that the applicant or their representatives could address to you how that piece of property is going to be protected from any sort of mining or peat harvesting activities. And that's, if they haven't done that to your satisfaction, you can make sure they do so.
Yeah, I think the public, whatever their reasons are, needs to understand we have no authority to make any other decision except what affects our 5 acres of land.
All right, I have a card for Linda Meister.
I'd just like to say I appreciate y'all coming and giving the presentation and tell us, what your plans are and that kind of thing. Appreciate it.
For the record, Linda Weiss, track 110 Oak Ridge Drive, Leesburg, Florida. And hello, everybody. Good to see you again. Didn't think I'd ever be up here standing here as a NIMD, but I just happen to live across the street from this proposed project, and it makes me an NIMD. As a matter of fact, quite a few of us live across the street from this. My development alone is over 1,000 units, and then down here in the southern part, over to the east of it, there's over 300 homes in Wedgwood, and then across the street from that is Harbor Shores.
Down in this area here.
So this is not a low-density housing area, it's really a high-density housing area, and that's one of our main concerns because there are so many homes here. We're already suffering the ill effects of having a 500-acre sand mine across the street because Durstress is busy building the Wakaiva Parkway, so there's literally dozens and dozens of trucks going in and out of there 7 days a week right now. And that's one of our concerns, is adding more trucks to this. During this Wakaiva Parkway project, all the sand trucks and concrete are going in and out of Durstress. At the same entrance, they want to have peat mining trucks going in and out of it, right across the street from the Florida Lakes. But as for the ecological concerns, I gave the same presentation to the Harris Council last month, and they were very concerned about this, especially Skippy as a fisherman, because the gator hole is a popular fishing hole apparently in Lake Eustis, and Skippy was concerned that there might be an effect on that, as many of the other fishermen are locally. There is no weir underneath Route 44, so if there's a storm event, everything that is in that 1,000+ acres can wash right into Lake Eustis and getting at the Gator Hole and then into the lake. We have some concerns because this has been acting as a buffer, and it's actually quoting the minutes from a meeting that I attended here. It's February 15, 2012, your own minutes. The Goose Prairie and its function as a natural filter for surface waters entering it from 1,100-acre drainage area is very important. And at that meeting, we discussed buying some more land in Goose Prairie next to that 5 acres we already have. And at that meeting, we voted to sell some land on 441. I think that's the one that we sold, and we were going to use the money to buy more land in Goose Prairie. But I guess it wasn't enough because we didn't follow through on buying more land next to that 5 acres. However, you did recognize the importance of the land at that time. And as the applicant just mentioned, land has been looked at for decades for its ecological value. And the comp plan for Lake County actually has a paragraph in it that says, and I won't give all the numbers, but it's a certain paragraph. Goose Prairie requires the county to preserve the integrity of the wetlands and the water bodies on Goose Prairie as an intact ecosystem of county significance by protecting its natural resources, including but not limited to the hydrologic regimes, wetland and upland communities, floodplain, ecological connectivity, wildlife, and aquifer recharge. And I might mention this, if the applicant's maps that he didn't show you one of them, puts that in a very high recharge area for the aquifer. And that's one of our concerns because surrounding those peat bogs is pure sand. It's very good recharge. And if they're going to pile stacks of peat all around these bogs to dry out before they load their trucks, the water that's in that peat, and he said 50% of it, could be more, the less water in the peat, the better for the truck, because that's less water weight they have to haul. But the water from that peat is going to perk down into the sand underneath it and into the aquifer, and we're a little bit concerned about that because that peat and that bog, part of it is right below a 9-course golf course, belongs to Wedgwood. It's been there about 40 years. A little bit downhill of the golf course, and everything from that golf course for 40 years has been washing down the hill and into the peat bog. And as you all know, peat is a wonderful sponge. It absorbs everything, nutrients, pesticides, whatever. So we're a little bit concerned about removing or messing around at all with that bog and taking that peat out, because one of the pesticides that's been used on that golf course for 40 years is atrazine, which has already been outlawed in Europe and parts of Canada, and most of the other northern states have removed it from the shelf because it causes so much problems with fish. Deformities in fish. It affects the endocrine glands and changes some of the male fish into female fish. Anyway, there's also, EPA is looking into its cancer-causing abilities right now, and there's a whole website devoted to atrazine lawsuits going on all over the USA. And so we're a little concerned because atrazine is the #1 pesticide found in well water. And these people in Wedgwood have a well, not too far from this mining site. And the people across the street in Harbor Shores who are here today also have wells. And Mid-Florida Lake has a well. So we all have wells surrounding this site. The peat's been doing its job for 40 years, holding that atrazine and those pesticides in place. We're a little bit worried about what our water quality might be in our wells if it's disturbed. We're also a little bit concerned about any potential runoff when they're mining during the storm season, especially hurricane season, that any of that might wash under that 444 bridge, the culverts, and into the Gator Hole. So therefore, the fishermen have some concerns too. We would like to leave it alone. The vegetation that's there, and there are a lot of mature trees now that have grown up around in there, are acting as a windbreak. They protect us from Durastress 500-acre sand mine next door. Those trees are a great windbreak. And if they're removed so that they can get to the peat, that's going to make a lot more air pollution. My neighborhood alone has over 1,000 units of 55 plus seniors. A lot of them are on respirators. I hate to think how many of them are on respirators. The air quality is not going to be any better with this peat flying around with the fungi and the bacteria that it also contains. So air quality, recharge area, the fact that this is could last as many as 17 years according to the applicant. And also the number of trucks has been, on one of the page here, they said as many as 26 trucks per PM hours. We're not sure what that means, but apparently, I think Mr. Caldwell said it was like from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock is peak hours. I don't know what that is.
12 round trips per day.
Well, anyway, I'm just citing what it says here in your own report about a minimum of 13 and as many as 26 trucks. So that's still confusing and we need more clarification on that. The trucks, the air quality, recharge area, atrazine, possible runoff into the lake especially during storm events. Do these berms, are they made out of sand? Are they going to hold it back during a hurricane? We don't know the answers to those questions. So we're very concerned about this, and we're looking at ways to avoid this process and to follow the comp plan. That paragraph that's in the comp plan indicates that the Lake County government knows how important it is to leave it alone, or they wouldn't have put that paragraph in there. Any questions?
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Nancy, did you want to speak on this item? Because it says 4, and I wasn't sure.
I'm sorry, 4B.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Nancy Hurlbert, 35624 Cypress Court, Leesburg. And I'm the immediate past president of Harbor Shores Homeowners Association. And I could probably say ditto and sit down, but there are some things that we would like to reiterate of our concerns. The well water. Linda mentioned Wedgwood has a well, and they have a well, as does Mid-Florida Lakes has a well for their development. However, at Harbor Shores, each property has their own individual well and their own individual septic system. So we're very concerned. There's 200 of us in Harbor Shores, 200 individual homeowners, and we each have our own well. So we're not talking about 3 wells perhaps being contaminated, but we're talking hundreds of wells of contamination. Again, this is by designation in the comp plan, a water recharge area, and I'm just appalled to think that anyone would want to even play with this area, much less it being designated wetlands. Your own report had this as property acquisition number 22 back in 1995 because you saw the value of leaving this and protecting this and making sure that some of Florida's last natural habitats remain that way. And it is working the way it's supposed to work. That peat, as Linda said, is a sponge. That's what it's supposed to do and what it has been doing for 60 years. And we really need to try to keep that as a filter between the runoff from the golf course and other areas. Keep that as a filter to our groundwater. An EIS, I don't believe an environmental impact study has been done, and we would certainly like to see that because we know for a fact there are gopher tortoise burrows out there, and as a retired engineer, civil engineer, I know gopher tortoise burrows have skinks They have snakes. We've heard that there are black indigo snakes in the area. These are all threatened protected species that as soon as you start messing around with excavation that disturbs the natural habitat, they're going to have to go somewhere. And with all of the residential neighborhoods around there, we're concerned that they're going to be coming toward garages and homes and things of that sort. Traffic now is an issue for us many times because of the duress-stress trucks and the pre-stressed beams that they transport. We have difficulty getting in and out of our subdivision at times. Duress-stress, we understand now, has gotten the contract for the Wekiwa Parkway for some 24 elevated bridges, which is going to increase their truck traffic, and adding 13 to 25 to 26 additional dump trucks to that mixture is a real concern of ours. So I would ask that you seriously consider this. I came here today thinking I was going to ask you to write a letter objecting to this. If you can do that, that's fine, but if you can't do that, I would ask that you put yourself in the position that we homeowners are in of having increased truck traffic, having a natural habitat disturbed, and the other issues that are involved with groundwater, surface water, and our wells. Thank you.
Thank you. Vance? You're up.
My name is Vance Yoakum. I write a blog called fiscalrangers.com. This is the first time I've come to this meeting, but I've been going to the school board and the county board and hospital district board for probably up to 8 years and writing a blog about government and fiscal issues. I'm a taxpayer advocate and I'm a property rights advocate. And the reason that I came here is because I read a couple things in your agenda about, in this case, it talked about, well, one of the reasons that you should be concerned is because there's supposed to be a buffer of 1,000 feet, I think, and it quoted the comp plan. First of all, the comp plan, as some of, or all of you may know, was pushed through when there were some very liberal people on the county board. And since they've had to reverse a number of it, nationally there has been a huge movement to reverse a lot of the damaging effects of these types of comp plans. But this issue here is you're saying, well, okay, somebody owns the land, and I don't know the people that own the land or that are here, and yet you're being asked to take property rights and reduce the value of that land because people are concerned about issues that they are concerned about. And I listened to these concerns. I didn't hear any science. I didn't hear any specific tests that have been cited. And they did ask you to maybe do a test, but that would be very costly, and I would think that if there are people that are concerned, they should pay for those tests, and that they be objective tests. I'm just, you know, I've been going to meetings, especially in the last 3 years, on the issue of property rights, and every time I hear the word buffer, or I hear some restriction about gopher tortoises or other things like that, I just get rather angry, because this country was developed based upon people getting property rights and the ability to own that property and the ability to develop it. And it actually extends to things like, as an individual, their body is their own property. Somebody can't tell them what to do with it. And so I would think that I would hope that, one, you affirm property rights of the individuals, both people who want to do this mine, as you know, they're going through a lot of hoops and everything else to provide you proof on different things, and that your land is on the outside, and you're saying, well, we're near it, and so we might be concerned. Well, I think that when they're starting to talk about the 1,000-foot buffer, that to me is just extraordinarily over the top. And those types of things should be reduced or just not enforced. I heard several items about the comp plan. Well, I know who was on that committee that pushed through that comp plan. And some of you may know the history of it, and that it was really bad, and they're bad throughout the state of Florida, and excessive, and they use legal means, and they use taxpayers' funds to take away and to set aside land that in some cases can't be used. And so I would suggest to you that you allow this to continue to the board, because I'm going to talk to them also, is that, and I used to work for a sand mining company. We owned quarries and things like that. I was the head auditor for a national company. And a lot of times these companies, if you set standards for the company that wants to do this mining, and they can improve with tests, like we had to when we did quarrying for sand and gravel in different parts of the country, then they should be able to go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just for accuracy and clarification, that what Mr. Hill is referring to is the county's land development regulation, which it doesn't call for setback, it requires for a buffer, it just requires that all development proposals 1,000 feet, within 1,000 feet of natural reservation shall be evaluated for potential impacts of the reservation, the preserve, related to hydrology, water quality, air quality, ambient noise level, wildlife populations, natural ecosystems, and settings. It doesn't require a buffer, a 1,000-foot buffer, it just says that if there's a piece of property within that 1,000 feet, it's supposed to be evaluated for all those things.
Okay, thank you for your clarification. All right, board members. We're supposed to give guidance to staff on what we'd like to do.
And more members, again, we have no approval authority for any of these mining or harvesting peat harvesting activities. The only reason it's in front of you today is because we own a piece of property adjacent to it, and if you're having concerns about it's being preserved or protected from, as a result of whatever activity goes on in adjacent property, that's what we need to talk about.
What is, I know you said it, but there's been so many numbers thrown out since then, I've lost track of what it was. How far away from our property is the proposed work?
I just quickly doodled on my map here, the approximate location of your 5 acres. This distance from the outside of the berms to the property line is 200 feet.
Is that accurate, Ron? You know?
I couldn't say.
Essentially, they're going to be bermed along next to our property line, is that what you're saying?
The berm, the closest the berm will be is 200 feet.
Okay. But it will be along the edge of the mining activity.
Yes.
Will it be there forever?
No.
That's just temporary.
That's temporary for that cell. Part of the reclamation is that berm goes away, and the berm's only like 2 feet high.
I was gonna say, because you're literally disconnecting.
Yeah, you're basically disconnecting your area of dewatering. It only is so the water doesn't run back in.
Right, I
to the cell.
understand, but it disconnects for the time that you're doing it, our property from the system. It sort of
Yes.
separates the function, which will,
Yes, that's correct.
What's the time frame from when you start up to completion to when it's going to be moved back into the wetlands? Do you know that at all, or you got a projection? 7 years?
17 years.
17.
The mine, and then
Okay.
18 years.
It's 17, but you're looking at probably a year and a half to 2 years per cell. So again, the way it operates, you go into a cell, you extract the peat, you move over to the next cell, you start your extractions while you remove the berm around this area and start the reclamation. Yeah.
As you go.
So you're probably into I wish Steve was here, probably into a 4-year time frame from start to finish the reclamation. That'd be a pretty good guess. And so now you have, as that area is finishing up its 2-year cycle, you're moving into the third one. The first one's finished, the reclamation's done, and you start your reclamation on your second one, on yours 3 and 4, while you're extracting in another, in cell 3 and 3 and 4. So it's just a rotating process around.
Okay.
Charles, what is this being used for?
Mostly for the ag industry, for potting soil.
Every year I start tomatoes the first year, the first month right after Christmas, and this year I got a large bag of potting soil from a well-known company. And every one of my tomato plants was all distorted as to be useless, and I had to throw them all away. Linda talked about this peat being very efficient at holding pesticides and herbicides and whatnot. I very much suspect that it was an herbicide that was in that potting soil that I bought that caused those tomato plants to be so distorted. Is any kind of an analysis done on the product that you're going to be
I
selling?
believe Steve has done some testing on it. I'm on the engineering side, so I don't know the results of that, but I believe he has done some testing on it. The material, a very small percentage of this material ends up in the final product. It's blended.
Yeah.
They'll take it to Oklahoma to their processing facility. They mix it with cow manure and whatever formula they have. So 15 to 20% of the final product is this product. And then most of this material, as I understand it, with CNC, goes to the agriculture industry, for fruit trees, for plants, for foliage, so not a lot of this product will make it into bags that you're buying, but you're buying the finished product like at Walmart and Lowe's and Home Depot, so it'll be, it already be in the pot.
I'm very curious, of course, as to what, I suspect it was an herbicide that caused these plants to be so distorted. The leaves would just curl into absolute knots as to be useless. I'm sure that other people who bought the same product at the same place must have had the same experience that I had. I was just curious if anybody knew what it was.
If you look at the overall too, the golf course lies in this area here, compared to probably 80% of the extraction area. The golf course influence is actually closer to the lake over on this side. So most of the peat extraction is to the north of where the north and west of where the golf course is. I know there was mention they pull the water table down, the material, 50% sounds high, but it's still 90% material. It's the void in the material that's holding moisture. So you're pulling, if you were to take a soaking wet piece of material and dry it completely and compare the weight and how much water is actually in it, there's not a lot of water. 50% sounds high, but it's really not a lot of water that's left in it or leaves on the side on the road. If you took a sponge as a poor example, because there's a lot of holes in a sponge, but the volume this is living material.
Yeah, it's dense.
Yeah, this is dense material.
It's very fibrous.
Yeah.
It's not like the moss or the black cow people are picking up. It's very fibrous and dry and brittle. It's a very fibrous, very plant material. A lot of plant material. You can almost see it, and it's still plant material in the product that's coming out.
And if you think of, like Cypress trees have been underwater for a long period of time, it's still pretty dense. And that's basically what this is. This is plant material that's died, it's been in water, underwater, and it's not rotted or decayed. And that's the usefulness of it. It does hold that moisture. And that's why it's used in the potting soils as a surfactant to hold it.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Opinions, does anyone like to share? I have an opinion, but I want to bring it to you guys first. Charles is just worried about his tomato plant. So it could be a lack of green thumb for a short period of time.
Had the ship sailed a couple of months ago.
I do have a concern that we have no authority over, but the Goose Prairie land filters 1,100 acres of drainage basin, which does eventually contain water that could go into Lake Eustis. And we do have a concern about the quality and the quantity of our Harris chain in all of our lakes. So I have concerns about the idea of mining this at all, but that's personal concern. As for our property, it is such a small amount. It does kind of buffer the backside of that subdivision, and we'd certainly like to see all of its natural function preserved in that subdivision if this goes forward. I think we ought to state that we want to make sure that their mining plan, make sure that he has described how it will, as best they can, preserve the function of our 5 acre parcel.
Yeah, well, it's 5 acres. And although the Lake County Water Authority has the title on this piece of paper, this piece of property, it actually belongs to the people of Lake County. And our job is to make sure, it's protected, and that's why I see it. I don't see how this sand mining or peat mining operation is going to adversely affect it in a large way. However, I live down in the Green Swamp, and I see the sand trucks going back and forth. I can understand what that's like. I've been run off the road line and that kind of thing, but up here, as a member at large, I have to look for the concerns of every taxpayer for Lake County. I just don't see where there's anything we can do, or write a letter or whatever. I don't know how that would even help you guys. I just don't see it. But and I don't see if we'll have support for that either. But when something like this is proposed and you see the pictures, you hear what it's going to be like when it's all over. I mean, you hope that people follow through and they do their best to do what they say. And I've seen a lot of wetland restoration projects, and most of the time they look great for a few years, and then the weeds just cover them up. And a lot of that is us, what we've done. And it's hard to change Mother Nature. I like the fact that, y'all have some experience with that. So, I would hope that this might even enhance that piece of property at some point in time. That's all I have.
Well, I mean, all I really want to say is that there's a lot of regulation and rules between the county and the state, federal, and St. John's, and everybody else is involved. I know if there's any sand skinks or over tortoises or anything like that out there, you guys are going to have to reclaim any of that. I think it might be for the betterment of the property to have room for another 50 years of, you know, decaying materials and water retention and that kind of thing. So I too don't see this as a huge negative. You know, as long as it's not affecting our little 5 acres that are sitting there, you know, we have really no jurisdiction over the truck traffic or anything like that. But I appreciate everybody coming. I appreciate everybody's opinions, and you know, I know that the truck traffic is. I'm dealing with what's going on down here in downtown Tiberias, and I have been for many months now. It's frustrating, and my car's never clean, and my windows are always disgusting, and eventually it'll be over with. But you know, I mean, you just have to deal with that sometimes with progress. But I mean, there's really not much else I think we need to say about it. But thank you.
Thank you for your time. And if I may, to the audience,
Actually, no,
I can't.
you're talking to us today.
Well, thank you for your time and the opportunity to answer questions.
All right, thank you. All right.